Easter is a week that has a difference to it. It has a different significance to it. But I also think it has a level that we get used to seeing and used to hearing. It's the cross. It's the story of the cross. It's the story of Easter. But I mean, how many people do you see wearing cross necklaces that know nothing about the cross? It's something that has permeated our culture. It's been a part of it, a lot broader and stronger than is normal. As we've gone through this series, something that us and our church and that we've been praying about, and everyone in here, if we didn't know you by name, we've prayed for you for this service. This service, we've been planning ahead for Easter and preparing for it. One of John Crist, he's a comedian, and he has a video that he made for pastors. If you haven't seen it, you'll have to look it up sometime. It's pastors talking about Easter, and he refers to it as the Super Bowl for pastors. If you've not seen it, you have to look it up. It's very humorous if you like humor, I guess. If you don't like the laugh, then don't watch it. But he, in the video, he talks about that, and I thought about it, and part of it was like, no, I don't know if that's right. And I started thinking about it, it kind of is. Easter is the celebration, it's the everything being added together. This is the whole thing is what we're doing with Easter and what we're focusing on. So that's what we're doing today. We'll go through and we're going to look a little bit at the cross while the kids are learning and the kids are playing upstairs before the Easter egg hunt. And then we'll go outside and 1,000+ eggs that the kids will run and get. And I'm sure those 1,000+ eggs will be picked up much faster than we put them down. They'll be done in about 2 minutes, maybe a minute and a half. So just to cover the last couple weeks of what we talked about, week 1, we looked at the book of Genesis and the book of Romans, and we can see when you look back to that, from the very beginning, God's plan was for Jesus to rescue humanity from sin and evil. It wasn't a plan B, it wasn't a backup plan, it wasn't something that he was just like, they messed up, we'll figure it out. Like it was the plan from the beginning, and Romans points back, from the beginning this was the plan. That's what it says, this was the plan, this is what we will be doing. And then last week we saw that even though, if you've read through some of the Old Testament, you see people that messed up a lot. Like, they're like, we're on fire for God, and then they're worshiping other gods and doing crazy things. Then they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And honestly, it kind of gets a headache, really, because you're trying to keep track. But even with all the problems of sin in humanity, we look at Isaiah. And Isaiah is prophesying 700 years before Jesus. That means he saw in a vision 700 years before what would happen. And he wrote about it. That was significant because it was showing that God didn't change his plan. From when just Moses came to deliver the Israelites, which is a part we'll look at today, to when Isaiah wrote that was 1,000 years. What has changed in America in the last 100 years? Like, everything. Like if you took away everything, like I grew up in a small town near Amish. Anyone know what Amish are? People know what Amish are? They're like horse and buggies. They don't have electricity in their house. They can't own like anything that has electricity. They can't own property, stuff like that. They can use it. So like it wasn't uncommon for them to be like, hey, can I borrow your cell phone? They can't own it, but hey, can I borrow your cell phone? Their way of life is totally different than ours. Like literally, could you imagine? Go home today. Don't turn on your TV because you don't have one. Don't turn on the lights because you don't have those either. What do you do when you go home? Well, I might take a nap. Okay, what do you do after your nap? Like, life would be totally different for us. So that's 100 years. So you can think of 1,000 years, what all changed between Moses and Isaiah, and then another 700 years from Isaiah to Jesus. And God never changed his plan. He didn't change his mind. I think for us, most of us, if we were God, let's put our little thinking hats on here. If we were God, what we would have done in the very beginning is say, you know what? It's 2 people, right? It's just 2. There's like 7.8 billion people on Earth right now. It's 2 people. How about we just like put them back in the dust, we start over again, hit the little reset button, and things will be perfect. Because I think that's what most of us would do. If you're ever working on a project and you mess it up in the beginning and you're like, oh, I have extra, I'll just start over. Like you don't try to fix it, you don't try to mend it, you don't try to glue broken tile back together normally. You're like, I have an extra piece, I'll just take it up, put a new one down. That wasn't what God did. He had his plan to rescue from the very beginning. Today we'll be looking at John chapter 19, verses 28 through 37. And I love the book of John. If you've never read through the New Testament, you should start in the book of John, I think. John has a very close relationship with Jesus, but he also has some humor to himself as well, I think. Part of it is John actually doesn't refer to himself as John throughout the book of John. I wonder how many times I can say John in a sentence. But he doesn't refer to himself as that. He says, the one whom Jesus loved. Now, if you're with your friend and they refer to themselves in third person as the one whom Jesus loved, or the one whom their spouse loved, or the one whom their kid loved, you're probably not going to let them say it too many times before you're like, okay, like, this is your name. But that's what he refers to himself as. Just the next chapter, they see that the tomb's empty, they go back, he gets a report, him and Peter, they're the two closest disciples to Jesus, and they both run. And John reports, they both ran, but the one whom Jesus loved got there first. So there's a little bit of humor, because he wants people to know he was there first. Like, I'm not second, it was just two of us, but, if you ain't first, you're last. That was his motto, I guess. But John had a close relationship with Jesus, so his account is from the friendship of Jesus. Just a few chapters back, he says that when they're at Passover meal, they're having their meal, this whole week coming up to Easter, and the Jewish calendar's Passover, and we'll look at why that's Passover here in a second. But during Passover, they would have a meal, and they would come together, and they're celebrating what happens in Exodus when they all come out of Egypt. For the Passover meal, it says that John is reclining on Jesus. If you don't know what reclining is, if I was sitting next to somebody and I leaned against them like this. If you're married, maybe you're on the couch or you're at a movie or whatever, you got your arm around, they're kind of reclining on you, right? Me and my guy friends don't ever recline on each other. I'm just going to say, like, that's not a, me and Caleb and Landon aren't going to go to a movie and like, hey guys, this is cool. But that was customary for them. They reclined, they hung out, but that was how close their relationship was, because you're not going to let just anybody recline on you, I hope. You're not going to walk up to a stranger and, hey, how's it going? It's that closeness they had. He loved Jesus so much. They were basically blood. They were family. They followed him. They went where they went. They did what they did. Everything was together. So when we see this account that we look at, which is looking at the crucifixion of Jesus, the death of Jesus, it is from the book of a friend seeing his best friend die. So that's what's happening there. In verse 28, as we start, it says, Jesus knew that his mission was now finished. And to fulfill Scripture, he said, I am thirsty. A jar of sour wine was sitting there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When Jesus had tasted it, he said, it is finished, and bowed his head and gave up his heart. It was the day of preparation, and the Jewish leaders didn't want the bodies hanging there the next day, which was the Sabbath, a very special Sabbath because it was the Passover Sabbath. So they asked Pilate to hasten their deaths by ordering that their legs be broken. Then their bodies could be taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the two men crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs. One of the soldiers, however, pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed out. In verse 35, it says, this report is from an eyewitness giving an accurate account. He speaks the truth so that you also may continue to believe. These things happened in fulfillment of the Scriptures that say not one of his bones will be broken, and they will look on the one they pierced. So part of the significance there is something that's not stated, is that there was only one of the 12 disciples that was looking and viewing Jesus directly. And that was John. That's, again, that close of a friend. He could possibly die for being there, and he is watching, and he is there looking at him saying, okay, this is what's happening. What are we supposed to do? Like, I couldn't imagine the full spectrum of emotions he felt, because although Jesus had told them many times that he would come back, they still didn't really understand. They saw him raise a man from the dead, tell him, Lazarus, come out of the tomb, but how can someone die and come back themselves without someone to bring them back? So that was where they were, but this is where we see the cross. He's on the cross, this is where he is. The cross is actually the most brutal form of death for the Romans that they used during this time. doing some research and understanding and looking at the cross and researching it, the cross was used for a few hundred years as a death instrument. It would be the equivalent to using like an electric chair today. It would be for the worst of the worst, for the worst criminals. But when you look at the cross, the other side of it is the Roman culture was kind of a brutal culture to begin with. You know what Romans are most famous for? You ever seen the movie Gladiator? That's Roman culture, like in the truest form of Roman culture. Gladiators fought all around Rome and Roman places for 500 years. And literally, people would pay or they would be there in attendance to watch them fight to the death. Like literally fighting to the death in front of people's eyes. So their society was viewed death a little bit differently than we do. You know, because for them it's a spectacle. It's something to watch. It's something to be seen. It's not something that's going to be back. This is what it is. They're used to seeing it. So for them, for a crucifixion to be the most brutal death that they have, it's a big deal. So that's where he was. That's what he was dying. And the reason that crucifixion was so brutal wasn't because of the nails that went through the hands and through the feet, actually. The Romans, what they did is they actually adopted crucifixion from the Persians. And the Persians, you know, they put people on there and they basically would drag them. That was part of the death, they would drag them. But what the Romans is, they decided that they could perfect it, put them on there to a way where the body hung to the point where they couldn't breathe. And the only way to breathe was to push yourself up, your legs were bent a little bit, push yourself up so you could catch a breath. So the reason for death is actually asphyxia, which means that your lungs stop working properly. But then scientists have actually studied the way they died and looked at it. And you know what the actual reason for death is? Because I always thought, growing up, he died because he was put on a cross. I mean, he literally has nails coming out of him. It's because he's bleeding. But the reason that scientists, Christian and non-Christian, that have studied Roman culture during this time, they have seen and studied that it was caused because of cardiac arrest. Their hearts stopped functioning. Because without oxygen, their bodies aren't able to function. So as you look at Jesus and you see, it is finished. And I think, you know, for you to talk, you ever been somewhere where you can't talk because of the way you're stretched out? So he literally has to lift himself up to say it is finished. And then at that time, he collapses. Like that's the actual image of the cross and what happens. And when we look at that, you know, like I said, we get so used to seeing, you know, we have movies like The Passion of Christ and The Son of God show, and then you have the Bible series, and we have all these things that talk about it, and we hear about it, and we know about it, and it's like, oh, this is everything that's going on, this is what it is, but this is actually what happens. And John's account is from his best friend watching his friend die this death. So the first thing, before we go on to look in Exodus, what I want us to know is that when Jesus died that death, it was for each of us. It wasn't because he was a wicked sinner like the ones that were next to him. You know, they were murderers and thieves that were hanging next to him. You know, they were the worst of the worst. You know, they even chastised him, you know. Why don't you take yourself off the cross? But he never sinned, never lied, he never deceived anybody, none of that. But he bore the weight, the punishment of all of humanity, all of our sins, all the wrong things that we do on that day for us. And it wasn't so that we could go on and live lives in the same way. It was so we could be delivered into a new life. He traded his life for ours. His death for ours. Because he died the human death, but came back to life, giving himself power over death, giving us power over death. And that's where the victory comes in. So I want us to say that. I want us to know that Jesus died for you. For each one of us, no matter how bad we have been, how much we think we've messed up in the past, or how good we think we have been, Jesus died for each one of you. Including me, including everybody else, and including the worst person you can think of to the godliest person you can think of. Jesus died for all of us. The scripture we're going to look at next is in Exodus 12. We're just going to look at a few verses. It'll be on the screen as well. You can turn there with me if you want, but it's Exodus 12, 21 through 23, and verses 46 and 47. This part of Exodus is actually when they're still in Egypt, and when they're in Egypt, there are 10 plagues. Most of us kind of maybe heard the story roughly. There are 10 plagues. This is after 9 of them. You know, there's been darkness, there's been frogs, there's been locusts, you know, water turned into blood. All of these have happened. This is the 10th and final plague. You know, if you go through it, the 10 plagues actually aligned to 10 Egyptian gods, and that's why they were happening, was to disprove their gods and show that there was one true God. And that's just the historical part of what they showed there. Moses is actually the perfect example of, you think of someone that doesn't deserve to be saved in our minds and eyes that God uses. Moses murdered someone just a few chapters before this, and he ran away. And then God calls him, you know, like years later, he sees a fiery bush burning, and he's like, I'm going to go check that out because it's not being consumed. Like, I'm going to go see what's going on. So he goes to the bush, and God's like, I need you to go back and save your people. I need you to go back. He's like if you ever ran away from anything, God, I don't want to go back. You know, like, he's like, I'm not a very good talker. I'm not very good at this. Like, he's like, I'll give you somebody. Like, you can use your brother. He'll talk for you. Go and do this. So Moses, because his original plan when he killed the Egyptian, it was actually trying to save an Israelite that was being beaten. You know, like we might say that it was for a righteous reason, but it's still murder. He killed someone and he ran away. And God still used him. So we can look right there just to see where God's grace is and where his love is, and that none of us are too far away from that. But verse 21 through 23 and 46 through 47, these verses talk specifically about Passover. And this shows the significance of what happened to Jesus. It relates from one to the other. This is the original Passover to the Passover years later. The Jewish calendar, when Moses had the first Passover, was year 2020. It's currently year 5,779, and Jesus died in the 3,700 years. It's like 3,770, I believe. Don't quote me on that date. But that's the years that caused and the years that went between us. They had no idea of Jesus. There was no debates of Jesus before this. You know, they weren't sitting around. They didn't even have the law yet. You know, that law that we know, like, do not lie, steal, cheat, commit adultery, you know, observe the Sabbath, all that stuff that, like, we've been told from little kids. Even if you're not a Christian, didn't grow up in a Christian home, most parents tell you, don't lie, steal, cheat, and kill. Like, that's, I hope nobody's parents were like, yeah, you can go kill somebody, it's fine. Like, that's, most of us know, like, you don't do those things, this is where it is. They didn't have any of that law yet. So here in verse 21 it says, Then Moses called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, Go pick out a lamb or young goat for each of your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Drain the blood into a basin, then take a bundle of hyssop branches and dip it into the blood. Brush the hyssop across the top and the sides of the door frames of your house, and no one may go out through the door until morning. He does this at hyssop branch again? Pointing that out. For the Lord will pass through the land to strike down the Egyptians, but when he sees the blood on the top and sides of the door frames, the Lord will pass over your home. He will not permit his death angel to enter your house and strike you down. In verses 46 and 47 says, Each Passover lamb must be eaten in one house. Do not carry any of its meat outside, and do not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate this Passover festival. So, Passover festival is a whole week. The week before yesterday. Yesterday would have been Passover Sabbath. Saturday is actual Sabbath in the Jewish calendar. So this is Thursday night. They're preparing. They're getting ready. It's Friday when they actually do this. Because the way the Jewish calendar starts, one thing I always got confused on was 3 days. Good Friday to Sunday. Like, I'm not a mathematician. I won't claim to be. But I can count Saturday and Sunday as 2 days. Like, how does that make sense, you know? But the Jewish calendar, the days actually start at night. So Friday is day 1. The Sabbath, it started Friday night. And then the next day started on Saturday night, which would be the first day of the week. That's like our Sunday. So that's 3 days. So that's how it's 3 days. So as they're preparing for it, they use the hyssop branch, and also none of the bones were broken. Jesus didn't have any bones broken. The branch was used to spread the blood on the doorframe. So the branch was used to bring the water, the wine, up to his mouth, on his sponge. So we can see that there's a direct correlation between the original Passover to this Passover, 1600 years later. There's so much that's covered in that time frame. So when this happens, I think what we can first see is that Jesus is the righteous sacrifice. The reason that we don't have to perform sacrifices today, which I might be in a different profession if I did, because I'm not a butcher. Like basically, your people that were Pharisees and Sadducees in Jesus' time were the priests. They were kind of a professional butcher. You know, I mean, the original smoking of meat. You know, they put it on there and caught it on fire over wood, and it was burnt up, and they got to keep whatever was left. Whatever did not get burned up, that was what they ate. But, I mean, they did sacrifices of doves and birds and goats and lambs. With the lamb, it always had to be a young lamb. It always had to be one without blemish. You know, you couldn't bring the worst of what you had to it to be the sacrifice. It had to be the best, the one that was the most prized. And as we look at Jesus, we can see that when you look through the Bible of all the prophets, and of anyone that did anything, the Son of God, Jesus, was the most prized. There was no one that would ever compete with him, no one that would be as perfect as him, no one that would be as holy as him, to be that one. It was only him. There was no one else that would qualify for that, no one else that was without blemish that could be that. And then the blood that you put on the doorframe, it would keep the angel of death, is what it's referred to. The angel of death away, and that would be that literally all the Egyptians, anyone that weren't Egyptians and those that were, even the Israelites, if they did not put the blood on their doorframes, the angel of death took their firstborn. I only have one kid. I would put blood on my doors for sure. That's like, I don't want anything happening to him. I'm going to prepare and I'm going to take advantage of this. I'm going to save my kid. But the blood they put on the doors, it even says that others did it too. Non-Israelites went with them. They left with them. So there were people that were Egyptians, those that lived there. Maybe it was other slaves from other countries, but they saw what was happening and they believed, and they put blood on their doorframes. It wasn't one that could just protect them. If an Egyptian did it, it would protect the Egyptian too. It was about who believed what was going to happen and who went through with it. But the blood that went onto the doorframes, the same blood that went onto the cross. It was the blood that purified and saves. It's not the blood that draws away or pushes away. It's the blood that saves. So the blood that guarded their doorframes, the same blood, when we take Jesus' blood, it's what guards our heart. It's what we can put over us. It's what we know can protect us. And that's what Easter is about. It's not about, as much as we're going to have Easter eggs and going to have fun with them, we're going to see family later today, me and my wife even. It's about Jesus and his sacrifice. And this is why the sacrifice was so important. And I know many of us may be familiar with this, but one thing that I want us to know, or want to ask you, is do you consider yourself a fan or a follower of Jesus? And I'm going to give some description and understanding of that. I'm a Chiefs fan. Most people that know me know I am a Chiefs fan. Mike knows I'm a Chiefs fan. We talk about Chiefs anytime we can. I read articles on the Chiefs before it comes out. I'm reading articles that day. I have made draft picks for what the Chiefs might do coming up next week. If you don't know what the draft is, that's fine. That means you're probably not that big of a fan of football. But you follow my point, though. I have a jersey that says my name on it. You know, it says Plain, Kevin Plain. So it says Plain on the back of it. You know, I have hats. I have shirts. I have hoodies. You know, my dad's got the Chiefs tennis shoes. I'm pretty jealous of that one. I might steal them when I'm in South Carolina next time. Or maybe I'll get them to send them to me, but I might wear them on Sundays. But I go to Arrowhead games as much as I can. As a pastor, obviously, there's not a lot of times you can go, so I go during preseason or catch a primetime game. But I know, I can tell you players' names, numbers, stats, their height, their weight. I know. I'm a Cardinals fan too. St. Louis Cardinals. Not Arizona Cardinals. St. Louis Cardinals. I know like two players' names. I looked at the roster because I was curious of this. I know two players, and I know everyone's like, you should know the third one. I know his name, but I won't say it because I don't know it. I know Carpenter, Molina, and of course everybody knows those two. It feels like anyone that sees it. I catch the score occasionally. I never watch it. I watch the highlights. To me, I will offend someone here. I apologize in advance. Baseball's kind of boring on TV. Just being honest. I love it in person. I love to watch. But I haven't even been to the new St. Louis Cardinals Stadium. Again, I refer to it as the new stadium, like many of us probably do. It's the third stadium that they've built. But you know when that stadium was built? 2006. 13 years ago, and I still haven't been there. It was built when I was in high school. Just an idea of that. I was at Arrowhead last year, and I was there the year before and the year before. So which one am I a bigger fan of? I follow the Chiefs. I do. I research. I understand. I get as much information as I can. I talk to other people. I'm excited about it. people ask me about Cardinals, things like, yeah, I saw they won last night, which they did. And I want to say they won like 10-4. I know that. Can I tell you anything that happened in that game? Who hit a home run or any of that? Nope. I saw the score. I'm a fan of the Cardinals, but I'm a follower of the Chiefs. I follow them. I know their information. I'll be at training camp later this year. That's the coolest thing to ever go to if you're a Chiefs fan. But with God, which one are we? Do we know kind of the basic gist of the Bible? We kind of know like Moses. We know about the 10 plagues. We know about Noah. Maybe the ones that they do like the movies on or the TV shows, like the Book of Daniel. You know about Daniel and the lion's den, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. You know those stories. But do you know, if you're a follower, you might even have known the verses I was looking at these last few weeks, pointing to Jesus coming. You can look through it if you read and you read through your Bible, and if you're a follower, you've seen Isaiah where he talks about this is the coming king, where he talks about the servants. And if you're a follower, you've seen what Jesus did in his actions, and when you follow something, it permeates more of your life. Right? Like the way I talk, the way I act to people is different because I know Jesus. Does that mean that it was different the day I became a Christian and I was saved? A little bit. But most of it was reading and studying and praying and God chiseling pieces off of me as I went along. Because I promise you, as much as we go in, God can take things away and he can take addictions and struggles away and they go away completely. But everyone I know that has struggled with addiction will tell you the same thing. Just because you've overcome it doesn't mean that the desire to do it's not still there. Just because you've maybe stepped away and you haven't done it, and my sister, and she had quit and she was away from it, my oldest sister, and she would tell you, she's like, I still want to every day. I still want to do drugs every day, but I have to tell myself no. Like I have to overcome that. And that's what we have to do. And every person I know that has some form of addiction or struggle, it's a daily step. But with God, when we follow him, we can rely on his word and his power. I mean, you can see people through the Bible that were physically healed, people that were blind that can see, people that were lame that can walk. You can see that power that goes into it. And that's what Easter is. Easter's not just a time for us to come and to be like, yeah, he did this is great, but it's a time for us to lean into him and to see what does God want for us? What is God trying to do for us? What is God talking to us today? What is he telling me right now? How can I move towards him? Are we studying him? Are we researching him? Are we looking to find more? Are we talking about him? Or is it just kind of I know Jesus. As the worship team comes, I have a verse I want to share with you guys. Matthew 16:24 says, Then Jesus said to his disciples, If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. One, this is a prophetic thing from Jesus, because he's saying, take up your cross. He's not been on the cross, he's not died on the cross, he's not been put on trial, any of that, but take up your cross and follow me. The other thing is, we often think of the disciples as 12 people, right? 12, that's it. It's not everybody, it's just 12 guys, it's not a big deal. His disciples were everyone that was following him. Everyone that was behind him, those that were coming after him. If you want to be my follower, if you want to be one of my disciples, you have to give up your own way. You have to take up your cross and follow him. You don't need to follow me. You can follow me and I'll lead you to him, but you have to go through step by step and go through the ways of where it is.